Hi. I'm sitting out in front of the statue of Elwood Stokes, who was born a Quaker in Medford, New Jersey, and then I guess converted to Methodism. And he helped sort of develop this town that I'm in, which is in Neptune Township, New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore. And it's called Ocean Grove. And it's interesting to me that the location in Neptune Township, because Neptune is sort of the Roman god of sort of spirit and also sort of illusion and psychic ability. So I think that's really interesting. This town of Ocean Grove is adjacent to Asbury Park, where I stayed the night last night after doing some of our site visits, because I wanted to go to this Info Age Signals Intelligence Museum. And something just said, I feel like I want to be near the water, be near the ocean. And Asbury Park I'd never been here before. And, it was a town that was sort of, came up in the post-war era as a big music town, and it's best known probably for the Stone Pony and Bruce Springsteen, and I think maybe John Bon Jovi was connected to there. But even before that, there was a big lively music scene in the 60s in Asbury Park, and it's sort of more of a wild town. Eventually, by the 80s or 90s, it became pretty depressed, and now I guess that the New York money is flowing back in now, and it's a very cute town, but it's a much more affluent town than it was 10, 20 years ago. But there's this counterpoint between Asbury Park, like the rock and roll town that has, zombie parades and the Krampus March, the mean Santa Claus, and some of the more oppositional sides of things. And then you've got the straight-laced Ocean Grove, which is a dry town. It was formed in the 1870s by this small group of Methodist ministers, including Elwood Stokes, who I believe he was born a Quaker, so I'm not sure when he converted. But in the 1860s and 70s, they built up these towns, and this was quite a thing, the revival movement of these summer meetings, camp meetings, where people would go to the South Jersey and set up these big tent camp revivals. And so the building behind me, you can see with the cross, it's one of, I think it's the state of New Jersey's largest building, and it's called the Grand Auditorium. And I think it was actually finished later, maybe 1890s or early 20th century, but it initially sat 10,000 people for their services. And tens of thousands of people would come down from New York on the train. There's still an active train line here. And, come and spend time in this community. And it's an intentional religious community. I mean, not so much anymore, I think. Although I'm going to do a walk around later so you can sort of see some of the buildings. And there's all of these little cottages. And what I understand is they still set up the tents in the summer. They've taken them down for the season, but they would still set up all of these tents, and there would be all these different ministry centers for youth and for women and for other things, and choral singing, and then these little cottages all lined up, sort of like these tiny beach cottages, but tinier than bungalows, really just like one-room houses, something you might imagine being in the Wild West, like a town only religious. And it's these very sort of diminutive little cottages with these front porches and plants and things. And so I think it's an interesting contrast. Asbury Park, last night I went out and I there was I walked along the water. There's a little boardwalk, and the moon came up, and the moon was bright red orange, which was kind of amazing. I almost missed it, but someone pointed it out to me. They're like, look, the moon, it's bright. And as it got higher in the sky, it became less red, but it was definitely a bright red moon. And I was walking, it was a bit surreal. The boardwalk is maybe, 5 or 6 blocks long. And on the one end is this abandoned casino. And on the other end, and it's shaped like a carousel, the entryway, it's and they've done it up with all sorts of new artwork with smart app technologies that you can scan the artwork and interact with it in immersive reality, which it's called Smartify. It was something like work on walls or something, like the art on the walls. But it was sort of surreal artwork around this abandoned casino. But for me, again, that's betting and derivatives and gaming and prediction. And then on the far end was this giant theater, the Paramount Theater. And that theater is still functioning. It's a beautiful sort of deco building, I guess probably, maybe from the late 20s, early 30s, and it's quite a massive scale. And it also would host music venues, I think, as well, in this theater. So you've got the Maya illusion on one end of the boardwalk, and then you have the casino gambling on the other end, and then you walk the boardwalk, right? And various arcades and amusement pleasures along the way. And it was pretty quiet because it's off season and it's the middle of the week. But yeah, so that was sort of this context of the Asbury Park section, and then this Ocean Grove and the Psi and the psychic. And so here we have spirit in terms of sort of faith-based spirit. And when I was looking up Methodism, one of the things I thought was kind of interesting, it came out of a reform of the Church of England in the Enlightenment in the 18th century. I think John Wesley and Charles maybe, brothers, and it was about method. And so think about that in light of cybernetics, right? So it was salvation through faith, but that you should work to improve. There was an improvement program sort of built in, and some of that improvement program was personal testimony and charitable works. So there was a sense of that was a part of the faith practice, was sort of charity and systematic approach to one's faith, and systematic approach to one's faith within the context of other people. And so I think when we think about a gaming environment, an optimization environment, the noosphere, this omega point, the idea of an intentional religious community, a small community where your own personal private space is very limited because these cottages are just like one room, that you're living in public and that you are being witness to your faith in public by the members of your community, and it is an intentional community with set rules. And later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about this Focolare movement, which I had written about in my refugee report. But this idea of having sort of ecumenical, intentional communities of optimization, and what that would look like if all of a sudden this sort of amazing old 1870s wooden building, what is the equivalent of that in smart society? What is the equivalent of that in Internet of Everything, in bio-nanotechnology, where the machine can get into your thoughts or your bodily functions remotely, which will relate to the trip that the visit I'm going to pay to Fort Monmouth. But I asked this at Shrinemont when I went up in the Shenandoah in Virginia, and it was the Anglican Church caretaking these ancient indigenous healing sacred springs, and sort of the imposition of Western faith practice onto the land. And I don't think we've learned those lessons. We haven't learned the lessons of domination. And it's one thing if you create an intentional community and people come from their own free will because they're seeking community in that way. And I have a friend who has been part of intentional, like not necessarily living together communities, but faith practices where the networked practice of faith through song and communal emotional gatherings is a key part of it, and it's beautiful. It can be incredibly beautiful. And and for the people who came here or still come here, it probably could be very beautiful. But what I'm trying to say to people of faith and people who are connected with institutions of faith is that I would like to hear more about interrogating the intersection of faith and technology. Because we saw that at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference on blockchain. There was at least one individual that was talking about religion as an API, religion as an app, and that you could mix and match different religions depending on sort of what your personalized needs were. And again, I'm not trying to be rigid or doctrinaire or to say that people can't be more syncretic with how they practice their faith, but I think it should be done with an intention. And I think in mediating our faith through technological systems that seek to enmesh us in these contracts, in these energetic contracts, towards some sense of an optimization, like this Methodism, this sense that you will optimize yourself to your faith. How does that, do we want to do that with an app? So mediating faith through technology, and thinking about that in light of some of the stuff we've talked about with the Templeton Foundation, right, and the Fetzer Institute, and knowing that people are entering into these contracts without a full awareness of what it is, or how their data might be used, or how their digital twin could be profiled and used to shape your outer reality. It's interesting, and the other thing about Neptune, I'm thinking Neptune Township where this is the ocean, and the ocean in waves. And I keep coming back to the waveforms. It's the waveforms with the econometrics, with the markets, with the cycles, with the frequencies. And, I've talked to Cliff sometimes about doing these things, and as soon as I try to sort of set up and talk about things, like noise shows up. So when I first got here, it was super quiet, and I'm wandering around, and I almost feel like I'm in a time machine, because I'm walking through this whole area that you could be back in the 1890s, right? There's no other people. It was just mostly me and the squirrels. And whenever I come to do these intentions, I'm like, am I going to have enough stuff to make a heart? I'm not sure if there's going to be enough stuff here. And I didn't know, and then it presents to you. And so I've been looking for acorns all over Philadelphia, and they're pretty paltry. But here, it's like a mast year for the oak trees. So there's acorns everywhere. So it's like, okay, so this wants to be an acorn heart, right? So I'm gathering these acorns, and it's, oh, wow. I don't know, there's some amazing bird there. Can you see? There's an eagle up there. Or an osprey. I think it's either an eagle or an osprey. So I was just trying to say, whenever I try to do this stuff, the noise shows up. So I'm laying out the heart. And this alarm goes off. And I'm trying to do this, and look at this ridiculousness. So this person is coming around. This grass does not need to be mowed. There's like no mowing that needs to happen here. But I guess maybe they're getting leaves or something. So there's like this huge amount of noise right here. And before that, there was the leaf blowers. So the leaf blowers are all on patrol. So the natural world is like all being taken over. But there is an amazing eagle up there. That's as close as I can get. But it flew in. It flew in to keep us company. All right, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about my heart before the mower comes back around. So we're here, we have the Stokes statue, Elwood Stokes, born Quaker, turned Methodist real estate developer for this posh, intentional Methodist community here with cottages. You can see the cottages over there. Lovely plantings. So we have the heart itself. I have at the top some grasses, because fall is all about the grasses, and some of the wild rice. And there are the acorns. And then I have a bit of phosphorate there and a beautiful shell. And this shell, it has all these little baby shells underneath, and was one of my favorites. But I think it speaks to this idea of community and collective. And then I put a bunch of milkweed to soften the edges, the fluffs, because I just feel like the world these days has a lot of hard edges. And for the English, the Methodism, I have boxwood and English ivy in there, and some winterberry. And then I also added a copy of my friend Deepti's, the saying that she sent to me: may all beings everywhere be happy and free, and may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and the freedom for all. And so I think that's important, that we're all in this together. And so then we've got Mr. Stokes up there. We have these little amphitheaters, and you can see the building behind me. All right, so I've tried to run away from the landscaping crew. They're really surrounded the whole building. So there's blowers and there's mowers, and I guess I just appreciate like the frequency, something about that vibration and that noise, and that it makes me crazy beyond like just trying to have this conversation in a reasonable way about community and intention and faith. Makes that a little bit difficult. But so I've come around to the back side of this building. you can kind of get a sense of this. It's pretty massive, this big building here. It goes all around. There's big stairways, and you can see some of the cottages behind me. And I'll walk around a bit. So yeah, so there's something quite lovely here too. It feels homey, it feels human scale, it feels comfortable. But again, I would say I think what we're trying to deal with is this thing going back to the 18th century of sort of Enlightenment utopias, utopic thinking, engineered happiness. Can we figure out the recipe, and can we get everybody with the program, and can we align everything? And now we have machines, and we have apps, and we have data, and we have frequency, and we have unique identifiers, and we have sensors, and we have all of these things that we think that we can do. And I think many of the people who are doing all these things think they're doing it to make us happy, think it's happening because they want people to be better, and they want society to be better, and faith has a huge amount to do with all of that. And so yeah, there might be a few people out there who are doing it for nefarious reasons, but most people are doing it because, really they believe in a utopia. They imagine that things can be better. They just don't know how to do it. And I'm not saying I know how to do it better either, but that's what's coming but there's a uniformity. There's this idea that there's one good way of being, that what makes one person happy would make everyone happy. And I think that it sort of disrespects the diversity and the uniqueness of God's creation, the universal creation, is that we are all unique and different, and what might make somebody miserable makes somebody else super excited. What would draw somebody to Asbury Park's rock scene would be not the thing that would draw someone here to tiny cottages and religious singing. I mean, it's a very different thing, and I feel like where we're headed is that people aren't going to have a choice, and that they're through various crises, whether they're economic, whether they're environmental, whether they're military engagement related, that people aren't going to choose. They're going to be forced into something that doesn't feel right for them, and then ultimately that's no utopia. That is a dystopia. So yeah, I think that's about mostly what I wanted to say. I do think it's interesting that when you try to have these conversations, the world of disruption interjects, whether that's a siren going off or leaf blowers going around or whatever, just to have a quiet place to think. And so it's interesting. But the eagle flying in and sitting on the perch on the top, it felt pretty cool. I don't know if it's an eagle or an osprey, but definitely a bird of prey. And I'm thinking, well, it could have been an osprey because, we're at the shore. But I'll do a bit of a walk around here to show you. The sky is full of all sorts of spraying today, so definitely on the frequency side. And yeah, Neptune, waves, psi, parapsychology, spirit, soul, music. They said that when they did this initial real estate development in the 1870s, that the initial thing you need is water, right? And so that they dug a well called the Beersheba well. So that was also quite interesting too. All of these streets have biblical names like Pilgrim's Way or Mount Zion or Bethany Circle. So they're all it is like this planned community. And so I've talked a couple times to Jason about what do they call it? The homeowners associations or whatever, and this is kind of a very early model of a homeowners association. I think that people here, they don't actually own the land. They just have, you have a 99-year lease. So you own the structure, but not the land itself. And so it's all about the rules and optimization. Again, everyone here is for choice, and it's quite lovely. I can imagine this would be a really great place to spend the summer and bring a stack of books. And for me, I actually prefer a mountain lake to the ocean, but I can see it. It's a quite lovely little town, but the question is one of consent and force and domination, and the fact that the religious groups, whether they're the Presbyterians that aligned with the Templeton Foundations, whether they're the Catholics, whether the Jewish faith doing Tikkun Olam, whether it's the LDS Church doing good works, all of this has to be understood within the context of networked technology that's working on light, because again, Smallwood was a born Quaker, even though he became Methodist, so there's that inner light component. Okay, so this is the third time I've tried this. I keep messing up. The camera ran out of juice, and then I thought I fixed it, and then I didn't. So anyway, if I seem a little flustered, this is like the third time I was saying this part. But so I want to sort of just hit at the fact that community is important. I think that this is coming off of a sense of 18th century Enlightenment thinking, of utopias, of engineered utopias, that goes to this, engineered happiness, Jeremy Bentham, this idea that we can, use markets to make people happy, use faith to make people happy, as if there's just one thing that would make everyone happy. And I think that just belies the fact that we're all unique and different individuals. So, you've got the Asbury Park, which is the one sort of way of being, rock and roll, wild version, and then you have this spiritual version. People look for community. That's part of what is so challenging about sort of the navigating the narrative structure these days, is that community is built through shared ways of thinking about the world. And now, and capital extracts profit from breaking things down into smaller and smaller pieces. So now we have smaller and smaller kinds of communities that are very niche and very rigid and very much feed into sort of identity politics and cancel culture, and we're distanced from each other because we're doing this through these digitally mediated spaces, and it's easier to cut people out if you've never even met them in person than someone that you see every day or you bump into at the post office or the grocery store. And so we have these new kinds of communities that are so different from these little cottages, and we're trying to sort of figure out how to navigate all of that. And so, but how do we come up with communities that are authentically respect each other's gifts and respect the collective, respect how we are together, because we do need each other ultimately. And I can't remember if I said this already, just about Neptune and the waves and the frequency. I was just really unsettled by the noise off of these blowers and how that sort of disrupts your equilibrium, and about the in this building, this giant auditorium, which is a lot about singing. I think it's not just preaching, but it's also concerts and choral music. And, when the lockdowns, that they made people afraid. They made people afraid to be together. They made people afraid to sing. But that power of collective frequency and bonding is so important, right? And so that's something to think about as well. And I guess I'll just close with, I have a poem by John Trudell, Lines from a Mind, and it's called A Face on God. And I think it's sort of relevant because I'm here to say this is a sacred engagement. I am asking institutions of faith and individuals of faith to think about their relation to technology, their relationship to optimization, their relationship to this Methodism, right? The Methodist, that you can improve through sort of public-facing acts of faith and charity, but that's all going to be woven into these human capital finance markets, green bonds, cover the world in nanotechnology so that you can make everyone happy, so you can heal everything. And I think that's exactly the wrong way to do it. But it's because people want to occupy the story that they're the good people, right? They're the good people because they're going to help others. And in reality, these predator energies take advantage of people's inclination towards goodness to hijack that and to steer off in a bad direction. So a face on God. Putting a face on God, divine madness. These wars between evil, even good has to hide. The wrath of the righteous, awakening a dormant mean, dirty, calling itself clean. And I just say that line again, dirty, calling itself clean. That's important in the social impact finance space. When an extreme is right and extreme is left, and all that hate is going around, rage has no time to rest, more than in the 1,000 dies when pain comes from the skies. Debris of Palestine and Wall Street, we are all the innocent, some more than others, but we are all the innocent, while to the lords of war, we're all a way of keeping score. With gods on everybody's side, spirit knows hard time is coming, earth dreads the waiting blood, while death makes a list. Who would have ever thought virtual reality would come to this? Saying we're only human is incorrect. In reality, we're human and being. What's it going to take to see? Maybe the way we acted today, maybe the way we lived yesterday, isn't the way the Creator created us to be. Creator gives us intelligence. It is our protection, medicine, and healing. It is the reality we create every day, our self-worth, our part in humanity. answers to questions that haven't been asked wait for us in clarity and coherency. And so what stands out to me about pain coming from the skies, and I mentioned today there's all sorts of spraying, wifty clouds, nanotechnology. Fort Monmouth, where I'm going to go next, is going to be related to frequency and air radar and air missile defense. So that's all related to this frequency. The next World War III is the war on the soul, really. And when they say we're a way of keeping score, like think about that in terms of the impact finance space and soul-bound tokens, that they're at war. You know, in a way they're talking about the earth accepting the blood, but in a way I feel like the next iteration of war is going to be more like less material blood and more psychic blood, more spirit. Like it's going to be more like our spirit is pouring out into cybernetic networks as opposed to blood on the earth. I mean, not that I'm saying that war will stop or that they'll stop doing the bad things they're doing, but this new iteration also involves the sort of gutting of our spiritual bodies into this technosphere. And yeah, it's saying that maybe the way we've been doing things isn't the way the Creator meant, and that we need to have intelligence to answer questions that haven't been asked. And there's so many questions that haven't been asked, so many issues that haven't been raised, and that can only happen with clarity and coherent thinking. You know, and within these communities, again, we're in certain narratives because we want to belong. If you don't believe what your group believes, then you're out of the group. I mean, and that's the way it is. Like consensus reality is how we understand the world, what our cosmology is. And we've, I think, through not intentional hijacking, but just our own inaction, we just go with the flow. We just watch what's on TV. We just go to the theater. We listen to what's on the radio. We listen to what are in the podcast. We're not agents. We're not active participants in our own reality. We're just going along. So just to try to down from the engines, the crazy engines of the landscape crew. I'm sure it's hard on their bodies to do that too. I'm sure it's not super pleasant to be walking around dominating leaves. I don't know about the blowing part. I know about the mowing part, like the mulcher mowers with the leaves, that actually feeds the soil, but the blowing around the leaves part I don't quite get. So I'm going to stop and then turn around and we'll walk out. All right, so this is the back of the building. I mean, it's very well kept. It's kind of like Shrinemont. I guess faith institutions have their resources. It's very charming, actually. So these are the cottages. They all have, I don't know if the tents are set up on the front. It looks like there are these tent structures or some sort of shade structure. So people maybe do a lot of their living outside. And then there's regular houses too. But this is, you know, they do remind me of these little bathing cottages. I'd love to see what it really looks like when it's in season. And look at the acorns. I just want to show you this abundance. It's so amazing. I've been looking for acorns like this all over Philadelphia, and they are definitely, it is not an acorn season in Philly for sure. Look at them all on the steps. They're just coated. People could take a tumble. See this sort of glorious building. It's quite elegant, right? Institutions of faith are beautiful. And, it is programming. It doesn't have to be bad program or nefarious programming. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to get people against their religious practices, but I'm trying to ask them to be thoughtful about it. Because there is going to be this push towards ecumenicalism, which again, I'm not about trying to pit churches' faith practices against one another for sure, because that's also part of the programming, is the war and the destruction. But I think that it is, we have to consider it as part of the noosphere, as part of this noosphere plan, and that the institutions at the top are doing this. So I think I might not actually get to go there today, and I'll stick a picture in, although it's terrible because I did it at night and my phone does not do well with photos at night. But But there was a bust at the end of the boardwalk again. So think about this boardwalk. There's the Carousel Casino with these crazy paintings, and I'll insert some of these paintings so that you can see what they look like. Modern art. So all this contemporary art now is immersive, right? It's storytelling. And I think a lot of it is actually probably some sort of metaphysical conjuring and manifestation. Oh my goodness, look, the bird is still up there. I don't know if you can see it. Let me zoom in. That's his special spot. I love that. I love that. That's like, I'll have to look and see what that is. I think it's definitely an osprey though. So there's this artwork with the casino on the one end, and then on the other is this Paramount studio of both music, and movies. So the Maya, the illusion, the grand illusion, which is also again about psychic ability, spirit, confusion, illusion, Neptune Township, and then at the next to the Paramount was a bust of a man. His name was maybe I'll go around the block because the mower. It was Patriarch Athenagoras, and he was the head of the. Patriarch Athenagoras was the. I think he died in the 1970s, but throughout much of the 20th century, he was the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And he was from Corfu, I think, or something like that. He wasn't from the US, but he was appointed bishop of North and South America. And he had some connection to Asbury Park. And so there would be a number of times, like he would visit multiple times, and he had this ceremony of blessing the waters. And again, I think water and structured water and crystals and this idea of coordination and metronomes and crystals and structured vibration are really important, and that doing that within the context of water, collective organization and water is key. And so there was this blessing of water ceremony that they still do today, where the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church for this area of New Jersey would throw the cross in the ocean, and then all the kids, I think they had one for boys and one for girls, and they would go out into the waves, again waveforms, and look for the cross and then pull it out of the ground. So there was this definite ritual aspect to it. And so this guy, he called himself like the man of love. And we've talked a lot about love and Eros and Kundalini and Fritz Kunst, and that they're trying to unlock love, right? Madeleine L'Engle, Wrinkle in Time, Love Wins. So his shtick, like on the bust here, it says the man of love. And so that was, I found it interesting that this guy who was not American, who I don't know had a specific connection to New Jersey, but was identified in Asbury Park around this issue of love and blessing of the water and the waves. And again, over here in Ocean Grove, they have this Beersheba well, also the water. But he was very well known enough to have a bust at the end of the boardwalk next to the Maya illusion thing, which is interesting. And he was very involved with something called the Focolare movement. This woman, Chiara Lubitsch, who was Catholic, even though her name doesn't sound very Catholic, Italian. She was a teacher from northern Italy, and in the post-war era, the Cold War era, she got really, really connected with the Pope in Vatican II, and bringing together the Catholic, the Vatican with Eastern Orthodox Church, and having this unison towards this ecumenicalism, which I think is going to be these small intentional community towns, maybe based on a refugee model, maybe based on a summer camp meeting model, maybe based on a outer space, whatever, interstellar spaceship model, one of these tiny cloistered cybernetic systems, closed systems. And so she was this triumvirate with Pope John Paul II and this guy Patriarch Athenagoras, and herself on this Focolare stuff. So I think that's a really interesting concept to integrate into this interesting dichotomy of the Asbury Park Ocean Grove, like this, and I'm not saying Asbury Park is profane really, but you've got the sacred and the profane, the rock music versus the choral music. And the place that I stayed last night, the gentleman who was hosting, he said, you know, they have like a canal that goes between them. They literally excavated a lake so that there is, like on an angle, that there was a separation, a physical barrier between the two, because this dry town with these certain values, and now I think they say these houses go for like millions of dollars, versus the more rough and ready, you know, but even that is mythological, right? Like Bruce Springsteen, America, like working class America. And so there's the music and the frequency and the vibration that goes along with it, with this institutionalized undercurrent. So anyway, so I'm gonna go, we'll do the next thing and stop at Fort Monmouth. Okay, I'm just gonna hold this because it's too hard. So today I thought I was gonna be going to the Info Age Museum, but I think I'm gonna run out of time because I ended up coming to what's called Fort Monmouth. And Fort Monmouth is about half an hour north of Asbury Park. It's essentially, it is a fort that was created during the World War I era for signals intelligence. And like I said, the history of New Jersey signal intelligence is really important. And it goes back to the Bell Labs, the Edison Labs, the wireless communication of sound, audio, and also of ideas, video, film. And you know, I think I've said it over and over, but this is about military context. It's important to understand all of this as militarized technology, and it hasn't just become militarized. This isn't something that's like, oh, this is just about DARPA. Recently, it's been this way since the beginning, and the beginning of it was signals intelligence relating to military surveillance and coordination and tactical procedures. So, you know, you don't stop to think, where does this stuff come from? But behind me is something called the Vale Hall. This road that we're on, it's about a mile long. Now it's open to the public because this base was closed in the 90s as part of the base closure program. But you can see it's sort of going back to wildness. The parking lots are all covered in weeds, but they've still got these bollards up for sort of high security that, you know, in case someone wanted to come in and do something to their signals intelligence buildings. So it was started in around at the beginning of World War I, and the Defense Department put out a call to the telecommunications companies at that time. So to AT&T, to Bell Labs, to Western Electric, to the Telegraph Service, Western Union, to get volunteers among their staff to train people to do the signals intelligence work. And essentially what that meant was they had to incorporate the ability to communicate with their new weapon systems, right? So in the World War I, that was like, I guess, the beginning of tank warfare, although that would have been really early, but also airplanes. And so they had these new toys of domination and destruction, but they needed to be able to use them strategically, and they needed to be able to communicate intelligence on the ground and aerial intelligence to the weapon systems. And that was part of what was required for signals intelligence. And you know, that later connected to radar, both in terms of the Navy and the Air Force. And I think Fort Monmouth was particularly known for coordinating, doing the first radar around air defense systems. And when they put out the call in, I think it was 1916, of Bell Labs, 6,000 male employees, 1,400 of them signed up for signals intelligence school. So that tells you something. There are a lot of people who are interested in the signal, and then of course within the signal that you need the encryption, and you need to be able to gather the information, encrypt it, send it back out. And at the time, it's kind of fascinating to think, because this actually, evidently, they only got rid of the carrier pigeon brigade in the 1950s, but they were doing it by carrier pigeon. And that was a big part of World War I, was training the carrier pigeons to convey the signals and convey the messages strategically on the battlefield. And so I find that really interesting to think about it as, you know, Cliff and I often are talking about communication systems. What are you listening to? What messages are you sending? Is the message you're sending, where is it originating, right? Is it originating in you? Is it originating from somewhere further out? And these are all things to think about, because I think most of us just go on autopilot. It's like, you know, when you're in your car on the way to work and you just know how to get there, and sometimes you sort of space out and you wake up, you notice a few minutes later that you haven't been paying close attention while you're in your car. Like, I think that's a lot of us a lot of the time, is we imagine things, we are carriers for certain messaging, certain ideologies, certain approaches. Let me see, I'm going to try to step up on this. There's a lot of poison ivy here, of course. That's very symbolic. Yeah, there's a lot of messages out there that aren't necessarily your message, that you're the carrier pigeon for. And I've talked a lot about B.F. Skinner and his Skinner box and the behaviorist training. And he wanted to use pigeons too, this pigeon project, that was World War II, but training pigeons through reinforced behavior to use their pecking mechanism to guide missiles. Now, I don't think that program ever actually came online, but that was his thought process, right? If you could use carrier pigeons to send signals messages, that you could also, redeploy pigeons as guidance missile systems, right? And then later on, it becomes radar, it becomes frequency, and I think we don't realize the extent to which the messaging that we're getting in society is weaponized in often very subtle ways. That's not really obvious to you when you're absorbing it, that it is a weapon, and that it's coming from a source that may not have your best interests or your family's interests or your community's interests in mind. Because again, I think, at least in the United States, we're not used to thinking about us as an empire, and we're not really used to thinking about the systems of domination that are inherent both economically and militaristically in the U.S. being used against people who live here, right? We imagine it as being outward facing, but I keep sort of bringing up, if you understand smart cities as the next generation Indian reservation lands, and all of the control mechanisms that come with that in terms of controls of family through social welfare systems, controls of erasure of culture through religious institutions, control of children through education systems, and the acculturation and the erasure of one cosmology in favor of a new cosmology, which is sold to us as, was freedom and liberation, but actually for a lot of people it was anything but that. It was attempted erasure and domination. So to be here at Fort Monmouth and to be talking about signals intelligence. Now, Vale Hall, which is the name of the building that I'm sitting on the steps of right here, and again it's getting itself covered over in poison ivy and there's all sorts of, there's cedar trees growing at the base of this now. Originally it was called Camp Vale, and it was named after, first it was named after Alfred Vale. So Alfred Vale evidently helped Samuel Morse commercialize telegraphy. But he had a cousin, and his cousin's name was Theodore, and Theodore actually ended up working with Alexander Graham Bell to scale telecommunications, and he became an early president of AT&T, and then somehow was booted out and then came back a number of years later and was the head of AT&T again. So at one point this was called the Alfred Vale Fort, and then later on someone wanted to call it the Theodore Vale Fort, and then eventually they settled on Fort Monmouth because it was after a Revolutionary War battle that happened here, and it happened to be the battle where the myth of Molly Pitcher, the devoted patriot wife who brought pitchers of water. Her name wasn't actually Pitcher, that wasn't her last name, but for the cannon, to keep the cannon cooled off, and for the soldiers, and that her husband was killed in battle, so she picked up his spot at the cannon, and that is sort of the myth of the Battle of Fort Monmouth. So eventually they settled on Monmouth as the idea. But yeah, so I guess now I'm going to take a break and I'm going to show you the heart that I made, because that's, I think, the real like communicating with life. So, okay, so right over me, there's actually a beautiful red-tailed hawk soaring. When I first showed up here, there were a whole lot of vultures over the parking lot, turkey vultures. And I don't have anything against turkey vultures. I mean, I like a good turkey vulture, but there was the whole bunch of turkey vultures soaring. So now the turkey vultures have headed out, and now there's a red-tailed hawk coming in and keeping us company. But I'll show you the sky. The sky is full of trails because, again, the signals I think that they want us to process are coming through particle and frequency, and so the control of the sky systems is really central. And after World War, so I'm just going to hop back before I do the heart. After World War I, they stayed and they developed a research lab here. A lot of the communications, radar, and signals processing happened here. There were the first radio-connected weather balloon was launched here. And then later in the 50s or maybe the 60s, there was something where they had maybe Project Diana, where they bounced waves off the moon for satellite communication systems to talk about communications in space. And of course, I think that was somewhat connected to the Biosphere Project, the International Biosphere Program. And Leo has done a lot of looking into that. And once we understand, like the visit yesterday with Columbia and the earth science and the climate science, that this is a attempted cybernetic control of the entire world through satellite communication and drone communication and Internet of Everything communication, and all of that as signals, right? Encrypted signals, decrypted signals, pattern recognition, AI. And so the fact that things like walkie-talkies, and I think some of the first commercial crystals were grown here for silicon chip manufacturing, and the weather manipulation here, or prediction markets around weather, around space communication, Earth space communication. All of this is embedded in this like little town, Little Silver, New Jersey. So I think communicating with the natural world outside of the digital, even though I'm doing this here and I own that. For what it's worth, I'm still doing this for the moment. But showing up places and just seeing what the world has for you. And I'm always like, my big thing is like, what will I make my heart out of this time? I'm not sure what will be here. And so when I came here, this is all sort of running back to wilderness. And I stepped out, and there was a meadow, and there was a lot of mugwort. Mugwort is supposedly good for enhancing your dreams. And so that, again, we're with the psi and the spirit and the other communication world. So mugwort was there, and mugwort spreads out a lot. There, when you never have a little bit of mugwort. There's always a lot of mugwort. And then mixed in with that was some Canada thistle, which is another invasive, so to speak, but very prickly and connected, burrs, right? It holds on to you. And so, if we think about entanglement, like these energetic entanglements with signals, with messaging that may or may not be our own messaging, that may or may not be weaponized against us or life itself. And so I kept going because I noticed on the map that there was a little creek, and it was actually called Wampum Creek, which is, again, a nod to the original people of this area. And, so I try to make my way back through the meadow, and it, you have to watch your step because there's a lot of poison ivy out here on the shore. And, I'm making my way through, and it's very brambly. So there's barberry, which is another invasive with these little red fruits. So there were tangles of barberries. There were brambles. There were the wild blackberry brambles. There were wild roses back there. So all of these things tugging and entangling you. There were tangly vines. And then I came and I saw, this kind of like crabgrass that stretches out over the pavement, searching for the crevices, and just thinking about all of the ways that communication happens, and it tries to entangle us, it tries to pull us in, and sometimes we don't even know how far back the tangle goes. Is it intergenerational? Is it centuries? Is it millennia of these tangles that we're trying to throw off the tangles? So I thought it was very telling that when I showed up here, in sort of a center of electronic warfare and communication warfare, that what the world presented to me was, okay, yeah, this is about entanglement. This is about dreaming. This is about spirit. This is about reality, and this is about making our own reality. And so, in this space, just like the Bee Lab and the Devon Dog Show. Now, I'm sure that there's no limit to electronic warfare. I mean, now it's just come out in the open and we don't actually call it military anymore. It's just we're training all the young people to be in cybersecurity, because guess what? They're building a world that isn't real, that they want us to live in, and that has to all be secured because it's all totally hackable, and it's not actually human to live in the places that they want us to live in the metaverse, but they're building it. And so the cybersecurity is no longer like, oh, it's on a military base in New Jersey and in the Presidio and in Kansas and Texas and these tucked away spots. No, it's just here. Like, oh yeah, no, everybody works in cybersecurity now, right? Because we built a world that can just be hacked and jailbreaked and manipulated by, yeah, sure, maybe some of those are bad actors, but then maybe some of them are giant banks, and some of them are maybe faith-based institutions, and maybe some of them are doing things that are not great, but they're going to tell you that they're good. They're going to seed their deception in a cloak of goodness, and that's what the social impact space is all about. So I'll just take a pause, and then I'll show you the heart that I made. Okay, so this is it. I had a candle, but it blew out. I was trying to shelter it with my book. So this is the heart. Now the outline is always the trickiest part because you need a lot of stuff. So I was running a little low. So on this one, I actually used a mix of, these are mussel shells from the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. And a lot of these little stones are pebbles that I got when the tide was way out in Philadelphia. So we've got, the heart, and I'm going to imagine that it's resonating with all this open space. So we're not doing hard-heartedness, right? We're having good energy flow through our heart from a place of abundance and not scarcity. So we've got the stones, we've got the little shells going around. Some of those stones were actually on the base of a tree, which is or the trunk of a tree, and I don't know how they got there other than being washed out of the root ball. And then I have this centered feature, and I don't know if you remember, I had this beautiful bird-like piece of wood, driftwood from the Schuylkill, that had an eye in it that reminded me of like the eye of nature. And so this piece of wood you probably can't quite see because I filled it up, but this was a knotted piece of wood with an opening eye that was similar but actually very rotten. It was a very rotten piece of wood, and so I sort of imagine that as like the death throes of empire in this rotten wood, and that's more like the panopticon of the signals intelligence satellite system there. And what I put into it, I don't know if you can see, so I have a dandelion in there. I have one regular dandelion, and then I have another one, a fluffy thing that's not a regular dandelion, but some more fluff. And then I have the barberry, and you can see the prickers on there, right? The entanglements. I have the wild rose here, some more entanglements. And then I have this grass. I have this grass here. And then I have the brambles here. And around that, then I just have a little bit of lichen and mica. And mica is good to sort of reflect its layers. It's actually in the silicon family, so it's interesting to think about that in terms of technology, natural technology. And it's good for thinking about our flaws and imperfections without anger and condemnation, because we are all imperfect. And then it's also layered. It's layers upon layers, and that's what I feel like what I'm doing with this thing is peeling back these many, many layers of domination. And then I have a bit of grapevine. So if there's something that says entanglement, there we go. We've got entanglement. And sometimes it's detached. Like, look, this all goes all the way back into the rotting eye. And sometimes we're way out here and we don't know what we're entangled with, right? Because we haven't stopped to actually even notice that we're entangled with something that isn't doing us good things. And where it came from. And where it came from maybe is in the panopticon of Peter Thiel and programmable money and a weaponized social safety net. And so here we've got the Canadian thistle with all the prickers
the prickers there. And then this is the mugwort with the bit of the silvery bit, and you can see, again, some more barberry. And then I put it in the embrace of cedar, because cedar is a healing plant. Cedar is a sacred healing plant. And the cedar just comes. The birds eat the berries, and then the cedar shows up. So we've got this beautiful, yes, sure, you have the poison ivy down there in the red, but then you have the cedar growing up and sort of neutralizing, in my mind, helping neutralize the dominating system, which is sort of exemplified by, if you can imagine, something that would be pretty toxic. It might look like, secret intelligence systems with giant bars and poison ivy growing through, right? Like that sort of says it all. But, this is shut up now. I'd be interested if anybody knows what that symbol is. The black, or the red X on the square. I'm sure it means something. But yeah, so that is symbolic for me. And I'll just look. I don't know if you can see. You can probably see some of the trails. Oh, look, there's a plane going right now. There's little wisps. It was very clear, and now it's just sort of hazy gray from all of the spraying that's happening. And that is related to frequency, communication frequency stuff. Look, here's another one over there, up there. So we've got a lot of that going on, and you can just see how it's diffuse. And it's, it's part of this transmission system, and what is being transmitted. So I think that's most of the stuff. I have the lichen, and then I am going to take a moment to read from this book. It's actually about theoretical physicist Hugh Everett III. I've mentioned that a couple times in the multiverse stuff. And there's a section here about gaming and information. And I think, again, just reinforcing the idea that the signals intelligence is about getting information to coordinate planned strategic action for a certain end. Okay, so yes, so the many worlds of Hugh Everett. So I'm just going to do a reading from a chapter. It's called Von Neumann's Legacy. And the section is called So Long Suckers on page 75. And he was a theoretical physicist at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, so not so far from here, maybe an hour and a half, also in New Jersey. And so think about this in light of signals intelligence and the fact that a lot of the coordinating and a lot of the prediction and the strategy and the gaming came out of the Cold War. And it was about using information to create reality and to create advantage for certain people. And what was that? How does that present? And then what happens when you take that out of when essentially the world is the stage, right? Because that's what happened in the Cold War. The world became the game. Like, the Cold War was a war. It was a war on consciousness. I think the next war on consciousness is the war of dictating story and tracking us in the game and using these technologies and all of that. Like, this is a new war on the domestic population, on natural life itself, not just people, on nature and the environment. But the coordination, the data analytics, the prediction, and then the sending the signals back out. And there's some beautiful, there's like 3 vultures over there, over by the, and there's these lovely little birds in the dogwood trees. So it's an interesting choice to plant dogwoods in front of a war building. Oh, and I forgot to say earlier that Theodore Vail, who was the one who was the president of AT&T, he didn't go to MIT, but he was a benefactor of MIT, and he actually acquired some very important scientific library, like book collection, and gave it to MIT, and was on the MIT Corporation for many, many years. So when we think about the war machine, it would be great if we could, live in a different set of multiverses where the open air prison wasn't run by the telecommunications, like our phone company and our cable company, but the reality is like that's where it came from, and it's happening with intent. So everything is being tracked. Natural life within a gamified mathematical construct, and that is what Everett was working in, and that is what the signals intelligence is happening. And now the signals intelligence is part of our everyday life, our phones, our wearables, our ed tech, our health tech, our e-government, everything, like, but it is all part of the reciprocity of signals, sometimes open, sometimes encrypted, all about the data analytics. But yeah, it's being coordinated, and we don't know what it's being coordinated for. Like, we don't know what the intended outcome is of this game. Most people are just providing the intelligence. We're the pigeons. We're carrying the message. Maybe there's like a message attached to us, and like covertly, we don't even know what it is. Maybe there's some embedded signal, some steganography that, I mean, maybe the goal is eventually to even encode us in our DNA and in our thought patterns and in our music and our conversations, that like we're just become living encoded beings for some outcome that we don't understand. And so what I'm trying to say, and you know, I'll say something from John Trudell, but he's like, use your intelligence as a being to think about it and to get clarity, because I think once we're in that place, we don't have to be their pigeons anymore. Okay, so long suckers. One of Everett's favorite recreations was a zero-sum board game called So Long Suckers, invented in 1950 by Princeton graduate students, including Nash and Shapley. Similar to Prisoner's Dilemma, it was also known as Fuck You, Buddy. The game encourages chip trading players to cooperate until it becomes more convenient to deceive and murder each other. Everett himself viewed life as a winner-takes-all game, and playing mind games was, for him, an acceptable way to optimize his personal utilities. Suckers, beware. Kuhn reflects, Everett had a good deal of ego even as a graduate student. We were all kind of an elite group though, so it would have been hard for him to play mind games with us. He lost track of the young game theorist after he, quote, disappeared inside a classified organization, WSEG. During his long career in academia and private operations research, Kuhn did important work in the field of linear programming, which is a method of programming zero-sum two-person games. Linear programming is used to find the optimal solutions to complex problems in economics and operations research, problems that are subject to large numbers of constraints. The method can calculate solutions for optimizing the delivery of medical supplies to all sides fighting a civil war, or to budgeting dollars between ballistic missiles, planes, and bombs for maximum punch in a nuclear strike. Kuhn, now in his 80s, is sensitive to the tendency of some Cold War historians to emphasize the malign applications of game theory and computerized optimization techniques over their more benign uses. Although Kuhn accepted Office of Naval Research funding, he avoided working directly for the military. It is embarrassing when something you do for purely mathematical reasons is turned around and used for dirty applications. I was like a tailor who made a coat with 6 arms one day, a coat with 3 arms the next day, a coat with 7 arms the following day, and then a coat with 2 arms. If somebody puts on the 2-armed coat, so be it. Everett, on the other hand, did not share Kuhn's qualms. He gladly churned out 2-armed coats on demand for the war machine. In 1963, Everett resurfaced in Kuhn's world, making a splash when a professional journal, Operations Research, published his generalized Lagrange multiplier method for solving problems of optimum allocation of resources. The Everett algorithm improved upon a centuries-old optimization technique called the Lagrange multiplier method. A creation of the information age, it simplified the solution of hugely complex logistics problems. Everett discovered the algorithm under the influence of a few beers while visiting Niels Bohr in Copenhagen in 1959. The beauty of the algorithm is that it breaks large intractable optimization problems into smaller ones that can then be solved, whereas game theory deals with how people make interdependent decisions under certain conditions. The Everett algorithm tells you how to calculate a range of consequences or prices for making those decisions in the real world when you expend a specific amount of a resource to overcome a constraint. It can be applied to logistics problems in which there are large numbers of alternative solutions and variously configured obstacles to those solutions. Problems of this type include maximizing the efficiency of assigning nuclear bomb targets, scheduling just-in-time manufacturing runs, allocating bus routes to the most efficiently desegregate school systems are projecting results of funding specific foreign and domestic policies. The algorithm was the cornerstone of Everett's career in operations research, but it did not drop on him totally out of the blue sky. So yeah, optimization. And that's what it's going to be about, guys. That's what the smart cities are about. It's about optimizing outcomes, right? But we don't know actually who's optimizing or what the constraints are or what the end games are like, are we, like, especially with remote labor and different things, like we may be pushing a button and we don't know what's happening on the other end of that button. Like, we may not have any idea. We may be conveying a message, but we have no idea the full implications of what that message communicates. So I think this is all part of the information systems theory, telecommunications, that we're creating this digital dust that then AI is going to scoop up. And it comes from these militarized intelligence operations to look at the patterns and then to make assessments on how the world will run, how reality will run for regular people. And so I'm just going to end with another John Trudell poem. This one is called Tikaan, Tikaan. And it says, "The licorice wolf with neon eyes, and the wolf in wolf's clothing appears in the night of the blue moon. Traveling from the other side of time, they took him beyond self-reflection into realities of light as it really is. Dreaming wolf welcomed him, a place of no separation by perception, into the land where all are people. We are the wolf, you are the wolf. We are the tree, you are the tree. We are the living, you are the living. Mother Earth calls to her children. You are all related is the ingredient. Without it, you will not know who you are. Hunted wolf took him by the hand. A little kindness never hurt anyone. A lot of kindness does so much more. Vanishing wolf sang in the sun. There's more to what's going on than what's going on. Ghost wolf laughed in a ghost wolf way. Your craving shadows are your demise. Listen to the sound of crying when crying cries. Look into our eyes. We are the past visiting the future. Look into your mind. What kind of meaning do you find? The licorice wolf with neon eyes and the wolf in wolf's clothing appeared in the night of the blue moon. Speaking wolf spoken words, distortion plagues from minds of man. You call us predator and then make us prey. Prey. Spirit wolf knows lessons of beauty. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Reality is in reach of those beholding eyes. So yeah, we are the wolf, you are the wolf. We are the tree, you are the tree. We are the living, you are the living. Mother Earth calls to her children. You are all related is the ingredient, and without it, you won't know who you are. Yeah, and so we're all related. We're all interconnected. We don't need their signals. I don't know what the vultures are trying to tell me right now against this streaked sky. Here, I'll show you. We'll turn it around. You might not be able to see them. They're way up high now. There was one, it was swooping in pretty close, but I can see about 4 of them circling up there amidst the lines. So many lines today. This is not normal. Or maybe it is the new normal. So just in closing, I mentioned before that someone had given me these beautiful silk screened flags, and this one is our DNA and vibrations. I thought this would be really appropriate to leave here next to some dandelion leaves. And these are bits of pottery from Bartram's garden, from the river that washed up. Old, 19th century, and crazed and cracked. And this bit I thought was interesting because it's got a bit of a pod on there, and I don't know exactly what that transferware pod is, but it reminds me a bit of thinking about the poppies, and the opium poppies and the opium wars and the way in which, like, the most esteemed institutions in our world, the ones that, are the meritocracies that have the scientists, that have the policymakers, the Harvards, a lot of them were built on enslavement and opium, and, that's what they call civilization. That's what civilization is meant to be. And, Trudell always asks, like, is this civilization? And if so, is civilization good for us, right? Maybe we need to be listening to some other stories that have some other cosmologies. Because I think, like, in the end of the day, the civilization just ends up as pottery shards, broken up pieces that tell a bit of a story, not a whole story about it. And I think just going back to the heartedness, heart-centeredness. I think there was a reason that, I put the heart down, outside the grand auditorium, outside of the statue, and then all of a sudden the noise showed up. Yeah, the noise showed up. You put down love, you put down a frequency and intention, and yeah, maybe it disrupted whatever pulsing thing that was in opposition to that. And it was interesting because, I went around the back of the building and I did a bit of stuff. Maybe 20 minutes later, I came back around to head back and they'd already swept it away. But the intention was set. The intention was put there. And this avenue is called Avenue of Memories. And, it's an interesting idea, this Avenue of Memories, as people are driving by. What memories are we reinforcing? Is it memories of the war on consciousness, of secret codes that are known to a few that you can unlock reality with your metaphysical magic if you're someone who's, a well-connected billionaire who has, influence over the War Department, and, you can bend reality to your will. And I think that's only if we're not conscious. I think that's only if we're not aware of the story that we're in. Because we can go out in the world and we can make different stories. And I think we can use our imagination to imagine different things and imagine them into places that are closer to being real. And they can be real inside of us, even if maybe they're not real on the outside, in the outside world. And that's what they've stolen from the children through this educational technology, is their agency, is their own imagining their own story. And if anything, it wants to eat their stories into the machine. It wants to like say, tell me a story. The machine says, tell me a story. Tell me your story. Tell me how you feel. Show me how you feel. The emotion, that social emotional learning, and the storytelling. Yeah, that it's all about the story. You'll see a lot. We value your story. Tell us what you think, but do it digitally. Do it into the machine, because the machine wants to know. The machine wants to know all the stories. So I don't know. I guess we gave it a story today. So, what story does this say to you about entanglement and civilization and love and layers of mica and forgiveness and understanding in our imperfections there is still truth and beauty and healing and dreams? And that as it goes, this thing isn't all powerful. It's not all powerful. There's chinks in the armor. There's chinks. We have to remind ourselves, this game isn't over. They think that they control so many of the pieces on the game board. But we're surprising. We're surprising, and we love. And we have love and generosity and the unexpected. And let us cultivate that. Let us cultivate that. Okay, so I'm on my way home. I thought I might have time to stop at the InfoAge Science Museum, but I ran out of time. I always have, my ambitions are bigger than what I can actually accomplish. But I thought I'd at least drive by, because I thought maybe I can, even if I don't get to go to the museum, I can set an intention. And as I was driving towards the museum, I saw this historical marker behind me, and it's for the Marconi wireless transmitter station. So the thing that's behind us is just sort of a smallish replica of what it actually was. But for people who aren't familiar, so Guglielmo Marconi was an Italian inventor, and he developed wireless telegraphy. And he that was really, I mean, that he was the first, and this was like 1899. And I guess the British Marconi Corporation acquired the rights to this technology, and then they had an American division in the US that was the American Marconi division. And early on, like, they were doing ship-to-shore wireless telecommunication, and then eventually they got it transatlantic, and it was sort of a competition between Marconi and Tesla, and they were sort of rivals in that space. And among the first transatlantic transmission sites was between Caernarfon in Wales in the UK and New Jersey. But in New Jersey there were actually two sites. One was near New Brunswick, and that was the message outbound transmitting site. But then the receiving site was at a different location. They were attached by wires, and this Belmar, New Jersey, which is on the Shark River, was the receiving section. And so there was the transmitter in New Brunswick and the receiver here. Now it says on the plaque that there were a number. There were a number of these receiving stations, and this was one of them. But up the road is the InfoAge Science Museum, which has a number of these Marconi buildings that are left, and they were attached to something called Camp Evans. And so Camp Evans evidently is another signals intelligence unit that was part of the Army. And so in World War I, what happened was that the Navy actually took over all of the telecommunications in the country, all of the radio communications, and held on to it. And they were actually like really loath to give it up at the end of the war. But at the end of the war, they didn't want the Marconi company to go back the way it was, because it was actually controlled in some part by Great Britain, the parent company, and they didn't want the telecommunications company to be grounded in another country. And so they ended up brokering, I guess the government, I don't even know how they do that, but they got GE to buy it, and then GE later folded it into RCA. And so there was, so that's sort of how the Marconi transatlantic telegraph stuff happened. And then Camp Evans during World War II was another major signals intelligence unit. And after the World War II was over in the 50s, they continued to work in the space, and they worked on like worldwide wireless communications, and that was sort of grounded in work that was done here at Camp Evans. And then later, actually, wireless communication in space, which is sort of central to the open air prison planet, is that initially they thought they couldn't get the signal beyond the ionosphere, and then they figured out at Camp Evans how to do that, and it was something called Project Diana. I might have mentioned that before, which is interesting with the moon. Like, they bounce the waves off of the moon onto the satellites. And so again, this space-based communication signaling system is central to impact finance, to all of the, like doing Project Keyhole, looking down on the earth and making prediction modeling, both about weather and about tree cover and about carbon, and all of ice melt, and all of these things are like, the space-based communication is central. And it actually comes back here to this little town in New Jersey on the Shark River, which is a tidal inlet. And evidently Belmar, New Jersey was sort of during the late 19th century, a resort area for New Yorkers, to get out of the city and come down to the shore. And we're not too far from Asbury Park. We're maybe 20 minutes away. So Ocean Grove, the tent camp meeting, Asbury Park, that's a little bit further north. And then even further north still is the Holmdel campus of Bell Labs. And then beyond that, on the water, is the Gateway National Park that was the early signals intelligence and munitions testing area that's now a part of the Sandy Hook Gateway. And I had done another site visit there before. So I'm just coming, this is like clearly a replica. They said it's not nearly as big as what the actual thing was. And I'm just gonna turn around and walk around a little bit with it the other way. All right, so you can sort of see off in the distance. So we're here in this little parklet here. And just at the end of the road, there's one of the really big cell towers. So, right, we have the today version, and then the yesteryear replica version up there. But that's some big tower, and I do believe that it interacts with sort of the the changes in the air, in the frequency, you can see how like covered over, overcast it is based on all of the spraying planes that we saw earlier today. So I'm just going to cross back over, and I'll just read this out loud. The Marconi American Wireless Company, 1913 to 1924. The wireless tower WW2GM. Presented here is only a small top portion of the original tower. There are a number of these towers in the area. They constituted the first commercial transatlantic communication installation. And so here we've got, just to situate, so we're on the top of this little ridge. In the distance, I don't know if you can see it, but that's water. So this is a tidal inlet, which is interesting from a water and frequency standpoint. That's brackish, a mix of fresh water and salt water, and that's called the Shark River. This was originally Lenape land, and so there's this little area that it's setting on, and there's a lot of poison ivy in there, but I thought it was quite interesting, so I'm looking to figure out what I can use for my hearts. And then these 3 trees are holly trees, and to me they actually look intentionally planted. They're nicely spaced. They're all about the same age, and well, I mean, we do see holly. I haven't seen much holly today, and these look actually intentional. To me, this feels symbolic. And I was looking up, like, what is the meaning of holly, because, you know, clearly we have the whole Christmas and holly, the holly and the ivy. But the holly was sacred to the Romans. It was actually, they associated it with Saturn, which is the war. And they often gave out sprigs during Saturnalia. I'm looking upwards into this tower, which has an interesting geometry to it. And then it was also, the holly trees were also sacred to the Celts, and they were opposite the oak. So it was the changing of the seasons from the oak tree season of the warm seasons to the cold season, which was the holly. And it was more a sense of everlasting life and sort of continuity over time. So that was the Celtic version. So to me, it feels significant that you know, right next to this location that they have these holly trees imprinted. And so I just gathered some, you can see the fern off in the distance, a bit of yellow, and there's a tremendous amount of moss around here. You know, I haven't seen a lot of moss in this part of New Jersey, but this whole area is just cushioned with springy moss. But when I came up under the middle of this tower, there was a part that was ripped out. And so I decided to make a heart, and it looks sort of like a bit of a wound in the moss. And it was definitely regular. At first I was afraid maybe I'd stepped on the moss, and that made that happen. But so I took the ferns and I sort of took them apart, and I created this yellow outline with the yellowing ferns, and then there were some that were still more green, and covered over the torn part, which is there underneath that shell. And so we have some dusty miller and hemlock, and again a piece of peridot fosterate, and a locust pod, and these little orange things. These were at the Bartram's Garden. I'm not sure, they were off of a vine, but they're a beautiful orange color. And I took a tassel from the dried corn over at Bartram's Garden. I had used a corn ear before, but this is a tassel off the top. The birds had made short work of what was left of the corn, or maybe the squirrels. And then I have the milkweed puff. This is a different kind of milkweed. And I think someone in one of my other comments had a comment to sort of imagine that what we were doing here was destructive or killing plants or something like that. But I would say, like, I'm not pulling plants up by the roots. And generally, like, plants have a life cycle, and sometimes in some ways I'm actually like spreading the seed, right? I'm like, you know, Allison milkweed seed or whatever, like spreading, and these are not invasive. This would be inappropriate if it took seed here. So we're not killing the plants. We're pruning, we're trimming, we're moving things around, and you know, I don't consider that this is a destructive project. So, and then around the edge, I have the purple flowers of the Thai basil, and I have some hosta little pods that I collected at Bartram's Garden. The Thai basil is from the potted plants that I have in my own home. And then on the way in, I saw some sassafras. So here, which is a medicinal herb. So I have they in the Middle Ages they thought sassafras was very magical because there were 3 different kinds of leaves on the same plant. One that had 3 lobes, one that had 2 lobes, and one that didn't have any lobes. And so I have one of each here, along with some acorns and then, of course, the marigolds, which you see so much this time of year before the frost hits. They really hold on, those and the mums. So for the ancestors, sort of looking across time and space. And I did include a little maple leaf because I love the red that I'm seeing now. It was a little jarring with the purple and yellow, but I did tuck a little bit of a maple leaf because I am loving those. Okay, so that's the end of our day here in New Jersey. I've sort of mixed it up from office parks now to abandoned defense installations and signals intelligence research centers, and just asking people to sort of think about our thoughts. Think with some clarity, realize that not everything that we get entangled with is our own way of thinking. Think about it within a historic context, that this metaverse thing that they're building is built on a history, and it's actually not a very old history. I mean, this is less than maybe a little over 100 years, right? 1899 with the transatlantic, the Marconi and the transatlantic cabling. So a lot has changed. But I don't think that we've situated ourselves in sort of thinking about the long-term implications of what it means to live inside an environment that is defined by math and algorithms and signals and waves that emerged out of military systems. And even the fact that during World War I that the US Navy just took over the telecommunication system. I mean, what's to say that doesn't happen again? I mean, there's so much that says these communication systems are decentralized and distributed, but at the end of the day, most of this stuff, the cloud computing, is tied up in cloud farms that are their major clients are the US government and intelligence systems. So, I mean, there's nothing to say at some point the metaverse doesn't just get reclaimed by the military straight up and just made public, even though that's sort of the way it is already. We're led to believe that it's all independent and sort of free market stuff, but it's definitely the public-private partnership working to control our understanding of reality. So thanks for joining me, and so long, till next time.